take tax money, and in some cases, like in Germany, it's as much as 5% of the national revenue. And in Spain alone, they gave the Vatican 260 million euros last year alone. They rake all this money out of the different governments around the world, and they never account for any of this. So, I mean, it's a huge money operation that siphons a lot of money, and it owns one of the largest real estate operations of the world because it owns this land that's stolen from people all over the world. So, you know, when you're talking about the church, you know, you can't view it as is often portrayed as this, you know, religious body. It's quite the opposite in practice.
Absolutely. You're 100% right about that. I don't know how much land that the Swedish church owns up here, but it's quite a bit. They're the largest real estate owner, and they have so much money. Yet at the same time, Kevin, when I read some of these cases, there was something about the Jesuits, I think in Oregon, maybe that's over a year ago, and I can't recall, but they claimed that they had to pay out lots of sums of money to some of the people and kids that they've molested and so forth as well. But they said this will basically bankrupt the branch and etc. And I couldn't help to think, wait a minute, they have so much money, right, Kevin?
Well, as a matter of fact, I know that case because I worked with the Tamaki law firm that won that case against the Jesuits, because I was working with some of the survivors in that case in America. And what happened with that case is it was $166 million, the largest settlement, but about 60% of that money didn't even come from the Jesuits. It came from their insurance companies. And the rest of the money didn't even come from the main Jesuit body, but it had been raised by a special collection that the Catholic Church had done over the world. So, I mean, the Church isn't suffering at all. And when it makes that argument that it's going bankrupt, it's a way to get public sympathy for itself. They did the same thing in Canada. And by making that lie, that declaration that they were going bankrupt, it then gave the Canadian government the right to say, okay, then we're going to step in and carry the financial burden of the churches, so that now, when Native people in Canada are compensated, the money is coming from taxpayers. It's not even coming from the churches, you know, because of this false cry that they're going bankrupt. So, I mean, you know, beneath the surface, they're not suffering at all. The only thing they ever have to do after having killed and tortured and raped children is they pay a bit of money and issue an apology, and they're off the hook. Well, what killer in the world could ever do that? You know, these churches are getting away with what serial killers couldn't get away with.
Yeah, they are above the law, but at the same time, as you pointed out, Kevin, it seems like they have managed also to kind of write the laws in such a manner that they're not accountable for their actions, right? This is a legal issue at the bottom of it.
Well, it's because they operate, and this is a very old reason for this. Of course, it goes back 1,000 years in England, but and other places. But under a system of canon law, the Church has always said that we are a state unto ourselves. We are not operating according to the legal systems of any particular country, and that's why priests are literally absolved from any legal consequence for raping children. So what the reason the present Pope, Joseph Ratzinger, is in trouble is because he helped formulate a document called Crimen Solicitanis back in 1962, and he actually enforced this document when he was a cardinal in Munich. And what it says is when children are raped in the Catholic Church, what happened to them is not a crime, it's simply a sin. And a sin, of course, can be absolved. What a crime is talking about it. And so they imposed what they call the pontifical secret when a child is raped. That means if you're a priest or a bishop and you talk about what happened to that child, you can be excommunicated. You have to collude in concealing that crime. So in effect, every priest in the world is involved in a criminal conspiracy because they know that if a child is harmed, they're just keep quiet about it and not tell the police. You know, I mean, that's an enormous criminal conspiracy that shows that the Church is, up till now, above the law because governments will not impinge on that autonomy they have.
I hear sometimes, Kevin, that the Church, or they're losing power across the world. Less and less people are going to the church on Sundays, etc. It's almost like we're led to believe that it's an organization that kind of slowly is just dying off. And I always thought, but wait a minute, at the same time, this is, as you pointed out, still one of the strongest organizations in the world because of their assets in resources and land and money. What is happening with the Church right now, do you think, Kevin?
Well, I think both are true. I think on the ground, a lot of people more and more are leaving the Church. As a matter of fact, in last year alone, more people left the Catholic Church in Germany than in its entire history. 30,000 people or more in 1 year alone, announced that they were no longer Catholics. On the other hand, the institutional power of the church is so strong because it has that close relationship with governments and multinational corporations all over the world. One example of that is I was talking to a lawyer, Jonathan Levy, in America, who's tried to sue the Pope personally and serve papers on him. And he says the Vatican knows very quickly what anyone ever does against it because of its close connections with the CIA. Because ever since World War II, when the Vatican operated, the so-called rat lines where they got Nazis out of Europe,
right,
they had a close relationship with the CIA. And in the 1980s, Pope John Paul II got America for the first time to diplomatically recognize it because they were closely involved with the opposition movement in Poland, the Solidarity movement there, which was heavily funded by the Vatican and the CIA. And ever since then, there's been a very close connection, and they have that kind of power to undermine things that are brought against them.
The Vatican, the Jesuits, the Knights of Malta. Would you say, Kevin, as far as you're concerned, that these are organizations that are at the pinnacle, the top of the so-called pyramid of those who are attempting to control the planet and the globe, Kevin?
I think there's a lot of interconnections between the elites, and that's certainly one of them. There's another level on which to approach this, and that's, on a spiritual level, I think very much, if you want to call, the force of destruction of the world, the Antichrist, it's certainly embodied in these institutions. No group that did the crimes it has done over the centuries and gotten away with it couldn't in any way be equated with the Spirit of Christ and Jesus' teachings. I mean, this is something exactly the opposite. And I think when you look at the way these elites operate, they have absolute contempt for humanity and human beings. As a minister working in Vancouver, I remember a radio commentator telling me, and he knew a number of the senior judges in town, he said, these people pass little children around that like they do a good bottle of wine. They have no humanity, and they think the entire human race is cattle for their use. So I think definitely there's something beneath the surface here that we need to look at about how, these elites definitely view us as a herd to be managed and used in any way they like. And that can only happen when we're unaware of their real nature and cooperate with their systems. And I think the more that we don't do that, the less power they have over us.
It's horrendous when you think about it, and it's beyond my grasp of understanding. If I'm going to be totally honest, it's something I can hear it, and I can I hear what you're saying, and I believe it, in that sense. But it's something that's very, very difficult to comprehend, and why the humanity has left these people. Is it something with the fact that this happens, do you think, when people enter into an organization like this, that they're slowly convinced or brought into it, or how are they sucked into this, do you think, Kevin?
Well, I think there's a few things at work, and one of them is, and I find the difficulty of working publicly around the whole issue of child abuse and child trafficking is so many children in our in the European tradition of child rearing, so many of us are traumatized and violated at a young age. It may not be sexually or physically, but there's an emotional violation that goes on, where children are told at a very young age, you're not allowed to trust your own feelings and your thoughts. You have to think the way we want you to. You cannot feel that. You cannot have a normal reaction to something. You've got to be managed and controlled. Now, that kind of trauma, as long as we keep that inside and can't name it, we are oppressed. We cannot speak out against injustices done to people because of that fear we all carry inside. Now, I've seen, that system that we live under seems to be set up to deliberately traumatize and dissociate people at a young age so that they're just cogs in a wheel. They can fit into the labor market and pay their taxes and not object to what's going on to them or to the planet. And I think that's deliberate. In that sense, we're all victims of this system. It isn't just native children or children in Ireland or something. It's a universal system. So I think that's part of the deeper thing we're dealing with.
In September now, you're going back to the UK. Remind me if this is true, right or not. But last time you were there, then in May, I think that on May the 29th, you were jailed and you're eventually deported from London, right? Yeah. Tell us about that, Kevin.
Well, that followed after some real successes we had in Europe, and just to give you a little bit of background before I talk about that, in the previous year, we had met, the delegation of us had gone to Rome. We had met with a number of Italian politicians in the Chamber of Deputies there. These senators had promised us support for our work. We were on European television, had a huge press conference in Rome where we described the genocide in Indian residential schools. We had, all offers all over Europe for interviews and support. And in the wake of that, what happened was I was invited to Trafalgar Square to speak at a rally against child abuse, and that rally was describing the involvement of the government in fairly high-level pedophile networks in England. Before, I had gone to the Netherlands at the end of May to speak, and on my way back into London, I was stopped at Stansted Airport, told that I wasn't allowed back into the country. They gave me no reason except, well, they thought it strange that a Canadian citizen would be giving public lectures in England, which is like no reason whatsoever.
Right.
And on that, they simply barred me from the country. They kept me in an immigration prison for 12 hours, and that was it. I was just barred from England. So I don't think it's unrelated to the rally I was going to be speaking at, or the fact that we recently aired evidence that the Queen of England herself had been seen in the company of 10 children at a residential school who had then disappeared and were never seen again. And we wrote to the Queen and asked her to respond to that, and of course she never has. But this is a kind of evidence that's implicating people fairly high up in their system, and so I think that's why one of the reasons they certainly don't want me there.
Obviously, a means of protecting yourself is to be making public engagements, talking about this, being as open as possible, right? This is a way to kind of combat this, if you will, because you become, in one sense, untouchable because the more you speak about this openly, right, Kevin?
Well, that's right. The only defense you really have is public exposure. And, the other side knows that. They know that their main weapon, like I often say to people, if I was a native man, I'd be dead by now. But the fact that I'm white and a clergyman gave me more protection. And so what they do then, their main weapon against people who are kind of in the establishment and speak out, they just try to discredit them and say they're crazy, they can't be trusted. And they've done their utmost to try to do that and to try to isolate me and the evidence that I brought out. But what's fortunate now is that this evidence is so widely acknowledged now that they can't deny it anymore, and everything basically that I've been saying is being confirmed. I mean, the government of Canada had to come out 2 years ago and acknowledge that half these children died in the residential schools. So at that point, the lid is off, and they can't really keep it a secret anymore.
And all they have at the end of the day is violence. That's the only thing they could do. They could bar you from speaking, or they can do anything they want, or from their point of view, attempt to try to prevent this from coming out, of course. But at the end of the day, I always go back to that idea that the only reason they've ended up in the position they have throughout the hundreds and if not thousands of years of battling with humanity, it's been because of violence, right? That's all they have, really.
Yeah, that's exactly right, and that's ultimately their when they get to the point of doing that, it shows you how bankrupt they are.
Yes. Because
more and more people are waking up. I see this all over the world wherever I go. There's people all over the place who are awoken to this now and saying, well, I don't feel like I have a loyalty to the system anymore. We have to reclaim our natural rights, defend our children, defend our planet. And the system is not doing that. In fact, it's doing the opposite. The courts are not defending our children. They're colluding in them. The churches are betraying the trust they were given. So why support these institutions anymore? Let's walk away from them. And I see that all over.
Absolutely. It's really encouraging in that way. And that brings us back to this question again of what you're involved in currently with the tribunal, because the question for me has always been, is there a way to battle against them in a legal way? Because if they've set up the system, if they control it, if they set the laws and the rules, what have you, is there any way they can be reached through legal means being in their system, Kevin?
Well, not within their jurisdiction. That's something that I often go through with Native people who try to go to white courts and sue the churches. I say, well, look, the courts in Canada, like every member of Parliament, take a personal oath of allegiance to the Crown. Not to the people of Canada, only to the Crown. So I say they're foreign agents. You can't rely on them to indict their paymasters. What we need is what common law grants to everybody, and that is the right, when the institutions and the courts are not defending you, you have the right to establish your own courts, your own community policing, and to protect your natural rights that no one can take away from you. So what we've done, for example, on the west coast of Canada, among the Squamish people, some of the Indigenous elders are now setting up their own tribal courts in the Longhouse, where they've said, we don't trust the European court system. We've issued eviction orders on these churches to get off our land. Now we're going to enforce them. And that's the kind of grassroots alternatives that people need to create.